We'll get started in just another minute here. Okay, I think we'll get started. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the second workgroup meeting for the fiscal year 2022-23 long-term heavy-duty investment strategy. I'm Jason Crow, and I'm the manager of the heavy-duty investment strategy here at CARB. And so here's a look at today's agenda. We'll have introductions and background. We'll go over the heavy-duty investment strategy for the year, talking about integrating equity into the process, a little bit about the technology status snapshots and market readiness. We'll talk about some emerging opportunities, metrics of success, our 3-year priorities table, some potential industry examples. We'll have an overview of SB 372, and we'll also have an update from the California Energy Commission. There is a copy of today's agenda available online, along with these slides that we'll be going through during the meeting. Before we get underway, just a little information on workgroup logistics. Throughout the workgroup meeting, we'll pause for questions. And at that time, we'll ask that you raise your hand to let us know that you'd like to ask a question or make a comment. CARB staff will unmute your line. And for those of you participating via phone, please press #2 to raise your hand. And then you can also use the Q&A box to ask questions. We'll remind you these instructions throughout the meeting, and we appreciate your patience if we do run into any technical issues. Also, we are recording today's meeting, and the recording should be available on the website in about 2 weeks. Okay, each year, the heavy-duty investment strategy is updated as part of the annual funding plan for low-carbon transportation and air quality improvement program, or AQIP investments. So what is the purpose of the strategy? It serves as an annual 3-year investment strategy for clean transportation incentives. And it acts as a roadmap for transforming the heavy-duty transportation sector. It outlines priorities for investment, including an assessment of projected funding needs for each of the 3 years in the plan, and provides high-level guidance for heavy-duty funding. It also includes an annual report on the status of the state's school bus fleet. Here's a quick look at the overall timeline for the funding plan process. Each year, the governor's proposed budget is released in January. The administration later releases what's known as a May revise. This year, the May revise came out on May 13th. The legislature will then finalize the budget bill and appropriate funding over the next couple of months. And then the board approves the funding plan, and that is currently scheduled for November. Project-specific implementation will begin in December, and each individual project will proceed following the general steps that are shown here in the graphic. So there are a number of different opportunities to participate in the process. We had a kickoff workshop for the funding plan on March 15th. And since then, CARB staff has been holding project-specific workgroup meetings like this one. We had our initial meeting on the long-term heavy-duty investment strategy on April 8th. There's another funding plan workshop scheduled for July 21st. And then following the release of the draft funding plan, the public comment period will be open from October 7th to November 7th. Then the CARB board is scheduled to hear the draft funding plan proposal along with public testimony and approve it during its meeting on November 17th and 18th. For today's work group meeting, we'd like to get your feedback on how best to incorporate or integrate equity as part of the process, get input on the draft framework for market readiness indicators, emerging opportunities, the draft metrics, the draft 3-year priorities table, and some potential industry examples to include as part of this year's strategy. One of the main goals for this year's strategy is to integrate equity more fully into the heavy-duty investment strategy development process. One component of this is by conducting ongoing outreach and community engagement. We are looking for input from communities to help better address identified needs in the heavy-duty space, whether that's at the community level or the individual owner-operator small fleet level. Another element of building equity into the process means starting to shift from a strictly first come, first served incentive model to a more strategic focus on targeting our incentives to help assist small fleets or businesses and underserved communities. The heavy duty incentive programs have consistently had high targets for investing in disadvantaged and low income communities, playing a significant role in meeting the AB 1550 requirements. There are a number of different approaches to achieving these goals, and we are looking for public input in all of these areas. And so with that, I'm going to pause here so we can take some questions and comments. Arya?
Sorry, having trouble finding the mute button. If you would like to make a comment or ask a question, please use the webinar feature to raise your hand. If you're participating via phone, please press pound or #2 to raise your hand. Staff will announce the name of the commenter and then unmute your line. Please introduce yourself by stating your name and affiliation. You may also type your question into the Q&A box, into the question and answer box. We will alternate between taking verbal questions and reading and responding to those in the Q&A box. We have no raised hands and no questions in the Q&A box.
Okay, maybe we will continue and then we can keep taking questions and comments. Oh,
I'm sorry, Jason, I spoke too soon.
Okay.
Eileen Tutt, I have unmuted your mic.
Hi, yes, this is Eileen Tutt with the California Electric Transportation Coalition. I'm just wondering, this is says integrating equity, and I'm not sure that I understand how small fleets and businesses are necessarily equity. I don't know that these small fleets are they more likely to hire community truck drivers, which I don't think is the case. I also think that small, medium, and large fleets also, the issue is really trucks in these communities, not what fleets they are. And I have some concerns about ending up focusing on small fleets without understanding whether or not we will actually increase the air quality and equity benefits in priority communities, which I've seen no data that would indicate that. So I'm wondering, how did we determine that small fleets or small businesses are part of the equity definition? And what additional, I mean, are there benefits to communities, priority communities that are traditional equity communities, focusing on small fleets would be my only, I mean, I find that, and I've asked this question before, I just find it confusing, and I'd appreciate some sort of data or indication? Because small fleets in general tend to not be giant moneymakers. There's some outliers, of course, but small, medium, and large fleets are generally not huge profitable businesses. And small fleets may or may not be operated in priority communities, or they don't seem to be more likely than medium and large. I don't understand that characterization. I understand focusing on small fleets and small businesses, but I don't know that that's necessarily been shown to be an equity. I don't know that it benefits equity, because what we really need is to get, zero emission vehicles, in particular trucks, in these communities. And the more we need to accelerate that market would be my priority.
Sure, and that's a great question, Eileen. I think what we've seen is that a lot of, especially in the drayage fleets, we see a lot of independent owner operators or small fleets that might be a single truck or a couple of trucks. And many times those individual owner operators or small fleets are minority businesses, or they're people living in disadvantaged or low income communities. And what we're saying is that we really want to target those folks. We see a lot of times they have the oldest, dirtiest trucks, and we think it makes a lot of sense to help them out, when we also hear that some of the larger fleets would have bought advanced technology vehicles anyway. So I think that's what we're starting to focus in on, and that's kind of the angle that we're looking at for equity as it relates to small fleets or small businesses.
And just to clarify, Jason, I understand you're hearing these things. I've just seen no data, and I will tell you that medium and large fleets and the truck driving community tends to be from priority communities, whether or not they drive in small or large fleets. And so if you're targeting these small, I love the focus on it. I just want to make sure that the focus doesn't result in lower benefits, because these small fleets tend to buy either used trucks from medium and large fleets, or they lease those trucks. So to me, not focusing on that part of their business as well may actually harm them. So I guess what I'm saying is there data, or, because I get this, I will just tell you that most fleets have large minority and low income staffing and are low profitability. Many operate, if not most, operate in priority communities. It's just, that's where I'm confused, is like, I understand a focus on wanting to help small fleets in addition to medium and large fleets. What I don't understand is the data around whether or not, like, focusing exclusively on small fleets is good for the air quality in these communities, or good for the economic well-being of these communities, because my sense is that actually the opposite may be true, that when you take away, and also I haven't seen any data that would indicate that large fleets would purchase these trucks otherwise. In fact, what I've seen is quite the opposite. They are the only fleets, for the most part, even willing to make this investment, and only because of the sizable investment that the state of California has made to transition. So I haven't seen either of those data points, and that's my concern. And I think you are very aware of it, because we've been pretty vocal about this particular concern.
Yeah, and I appreciate the caveat that a lot of the data we're still in the process of trying to get our hands on. And so we are going to be looking at that as it comes in, and making sure that we are focusing on the right things. And certainly we are also looking at potential leasing models, as well as the secondary market as that starts to develop. So those are good points that you bring up. I don't know if any of our other panelists have anything to contribute to that. Okay, well, thanks so much for those questions and comments, Eileen. I know we're going to be digging into data as we go forward, but that is certainly what we're looking at, and appreciate your comments.
I'm gonna read a comment from the Q&A box, just because it is timely. It's from an anonymous attendee. Fully agree with Eileen here. Air quality outcomes are more important from an equity lens than who owns the truck. We have several more raised hands. Next up, we have Dusty Garland. Dusty, I have unmuted your mic.
Hi, this is Dusty Garland from Peterbilt Motors. I would, I think, echo a lot of what Eileen said, and just a couple of thoughts there. One, so I specifically work with our customers on grant and incentive programs, and we as Peterbilt deal with a lot of large fleets. I don't know very many of them at all that we've spoken with who have said, well, grant or no grant, no big deal, we're planning on moving forward with this anyway. So I would echo her point about that. Most of them absolutely are relying on the grants and incentives to move forward with their electric vehicle purchases at this time, or zero emission purchases at this time. The second thing that I think say is, if there is to be a focus on small fleets, and I know from the HVIP program there started to be some focus on this, and previously they had began focusing on disadvantaged communities. I don't disagree with those things. I don't disagree really with even giving them the first shot at those funds. But I think Eileen is right that I don't know that necessarily large fleets are taking all the money that small fleets would have purchased zero emission vehicles with otherwise. And so I think it would be good if we are going to move in that direction and say we're going to give first preference to small fleets, to give a way out there. And that would be done by saying, okay, small fleets will be either scored higher, or they will be given preference, or they will get first come ability if they're willing to raise their hand and say that they want it. But if not, then those funds are going to be released to the other fleets who have applied for programs that the state is offering. Because what I would not want to happen is a budget is passed, a long-term plan is created. We do get 1 or 2 years from that and realize the small fleets were not ready to adopt. They didn't have the capital. They weren't in the right operating conditions to do so. And now we have to go through the whole process again, which really has just delayed adoption at volume of zero emission vehicles. And that higher volume adoption is what will drive down price. It'll display and showcase the technology in the industry and help even more adoption. So I just wouldn't want it delayed because we threw all our eggs in the small fleet basket and come to find out the demand wasn't there like we thought it would. But I would just suggest as we create those programs, let's create them so that we can have one plan and then an ability to still have high level adoption with that plan if the small fleets are not as willing or not in as high demand of those vehicles as we thought they were. I hope that makes sense. But thank you for taking the comment.
For sure, understand. Appreciate your comments, Dusty.
Thank you, Thank you, Dusty. Next up, we have Andy Schwartz. Andy, I have unmuted your mic.
Hey, good afternoon. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, this Andy Schwartz with Tesla. I just want to align. Tesla, I think, is very much aligned with the comments of Eileen and Dusty on this issue. I think as you've heard both in this forum and other forums, I think there's a lot of skepticism around the assertion that larger fleets, do not need any incentives whatsoever to move forward with their plans to purchase zero emission vehicles. And given that, it just seems wildly premature to completely exclude them, as HVIP is now slated to do starting in 2023. There are other kind of less draconian approaches that are on the record that we and others have advocated for that we would strongly encourage ARB to consider, rather than this complete exclusion from the program, particularly given the critical role that larger fleets are going to play in the development of what currently is a very nascent market. Thanks.
Thank you, Andy.
Next up, we have Jamie Levin. Jamie, I've unmuted your mic.
Hey, thank you. Jamie Levin with the Center for Transportation and the Environment. I joined a few minutes late, so I apologize if I'm bringing something up, Jason, that you had already addressed. But it seems to me a critical common denominator here, regardless of fleet size, but with the goal of scaling up zero emission drayage and heavy duty applications, is the total cost of ownership. So it's one thing to get the cost of the vehicle down in order to make it affordable, whether it's, you know, as a lease or a purchase. And primarily the fleet operators are going to be interested in the leasing cost, but also what's it going to cost me to service that vehicle? What's it going to cost me to fuel that vehicle, whether it's with hydrogen or charging, and my availability of infrastructure to fuel the vehicle. And then I would suggest a fourth component, and that is, how's this going to affect my payload? Presently, fleet operators are based on what comes off those ships for drayage and what they have to carry, given the weight limits, even with the additional 2,000 pounds here in California. Those are critical questions that we're dealing with as we deploy our own program and as we talk to fleet operators. So I think TCO has to be the basis by which whoever buys these or leases these trucks recognizes that it's financially affordable. The other thing I wanted to mention is that we've got to keep our eyes focused on the hydrogen. This is now on the fuel cell side, on the $8 billion FOA that's rumored to now the next step coming out on June 6th. And we've got to be focused on that, because here's an opportunity on the hydrogen side to deploy not 100 or 200 or 300, but potentially 1,000 or 2,000 vehicles. No small task, by the way, to manufacture that with multiple OEMs. But CARB needs to look at how it's going to leverage its money, all the money we're getting, to take advantage of this federal opportunity. I'll conclude with that, but I think those are two important points to emphasize to the group.
Great. Thank you, Jamie.
Next up, we have Urvi Nagrani. Urvi, I've unmuted your mic.
Thanks for taking my comment. I'd love to just kind of focus on that equity side, where I think the most important thing when we're thinking about an equity lens is the air quality in the community. And I think over the years, this conversation has kind of happened on the industry side about whether it's a small fleet or a large fleet and who's going to be the most effective actor. And at the end of the day, we haven't seen as much work happening in the communities that we actually need to see. And so one of the things is, a lot of times the purchase orders that come with these incentives are what's needed to go to that utility and start the infrastructure that actually gets a project on the ground. And we know that, you know, the supply chains right now are going incredibly slow. And so any delay at the beginning has ripple effects, but also that isn't new. You know, we saw that during the Trump era, that the costs of vehicles started going up because of the steel tariffs. We saw that with other component supplies. We've seen that COVID has led to delays in shipping of key components. We've seen that on semiconductors. One of the things that we have to think about is it's no longer an unforeseen delay. We are seeing longer and longer timelines because of the combination of climate change, pandemic, and changing business norms. And so when we're thinking about how do we address this issue, we need to focus on what is the outcome we want. And the outcome we want is clean air for all of Californians. And we're not going to get there without the chargers and the infrastructures. And we're not getting chargers and infrastructures until there's a purchase order. And so if you can have a way to, you know, prioritize minority-owned businesses, for example, as a process that takes the same amount of time as selling to a large fleet, great, do it. But if you look at these warehouse districts, they're all next to each other. It's all the same vehicles, it's all the same air, and they're all going past the same communities in these sort of diesel death zones. And so when we're thinking about sort of how do we get that project kicked off, it's much more important to think about not wasting time and therefore locking into costs today before they change than it is to think about the best way, because sometimes that over focus on how do we get it perfect means we'll ruin a lot of things by waiting too long and having underlying issues change.
Great. Thank you so much, Irvi.
Thank you. Up next, we have Adriano Martinez. Adriano, I've unmuted your mic.
Hi, thanks for the opportunity to weigh in today. So I just want to respond on a couple things. So as you're developing this program, I do think there is some benefit to having different types of fleets compete within their categorization instead of just one free-for-all competition. So larger fleets should be competing with larger fleets for these types of funds, and smaller businesses should be competing with smaller businesses. And I think that that's pretty important because some of these larger entities have sufficient funds to go hire consulting firms and other folks who have kind of mastered the game of getting these government incentive programs. And so I think one way to equalize it is kind of just create, kind of better competition pools for the funding that's allocated. The second point on the equity piece I'd like to put forward is I know this is about how CARB is spending the money from the budget, but I think it's important that the Air Resources Board particularly look to some of the ports to either expand the fees they're collecting so that they put more towards this necessary conversion, or for ports that don't have any fee revenue to kind of do so. Because while taxpayers can be important catalysts to move, certain types of industry like the port drayage truck industry to zero emissions, I think we should put the onus on the ports, which have been built and are attracting these vehicles, to do more, because those are some of the largest recipients and beneficiaries of these statewide programs. I think kind of really continuing the push to have them provide more funding so that they can create greater matches and get more clean technology out there is important. And then on the third point, I think on an equity standpoint, I think CARB should explore some innovative type programs. I mean, if you look at port drayage, it's inherently an equitable system. Old trucks go to the drayage system to kind of die. And it's a system that isn't reflective of the amount of money that flows into the goods movement system. So I think looking at different models where you could work with government entities to create some type of more accountability, whether it's through a franchise system, moving portions of cargo with zero emission trucks with good labor standards, kind of not just look at equity and kind of this traditional model that seems to have a lot of problems, and actually use this to kind of push more accountability in the system and a more equitable approach to kind of moving cargo. And then the final point I just wanted to raise is I think we need to look at equity not just in who receives the vehicles, but also what companies are making the vehicles. And so I think putting requirements and ways to kind of make sure that folks are receiving incentives are creating good community benefits, and kind of creating employment opportunities, as a way to kind of advance equity is another important consideration that I'd hope gets woven into whatever program CARB ultimately develops and continues. Thanks.
Thank you so much for those comments.
Thank you. Unfortunately, we have sort of run out of time a little bit. So we do need to move on, but if there is time at the end, we'll be able to take more questions. Jason?
Absolutely. We should have some more time later on, but thank you. All right. So now I'm going to turn this over to Jesse Lund at CalSTAR to provide some updates on our tech status snapshots. Jesse?
Thank you, Jason. So for those of you familiar with past strategies, this slide should look pretty familiar to you. As in past years, we will be assessing current technology readiness levels via these tech status snapshots. Shown here, you can see the snapshot for off-road fuel cell equipment on the left and battery electric equipment on the right, both off-road. If you'd like more information about how these readiness levels are calculated, I invite you to check out the white paper that was published earlier this year outlining the methodology. I am pasting the link in the chat right now. However, I do want to note that technology readiness only shows part of the process of new technologies coming to market. There are also a number of factors that affect overall market readiness. So as we discussed on the last work group, for the first time ever as part of this year's strategy, we will be assessing the commercially mature technologies, such as those shown in the colored right-hand section of these snapshots, against 6 market readiness indicators, or MRIs for short. Perfect. So these new MRIs include production capacity, assessing whether sufficient commercial production exists for these technologies, cost parity, evaluating the total cost of ownership or TCO of these zero emission technologies, and how that TCO compares with traditional internal combustion alternatives, both with and without incentives. We will also be assessing duty cycle applicability, assessing the ability of the technology to meet range, payload, and power requirements of common duty cycles for each application. We'll be evaluating infrastructure and the ease and availability of accessing appropriate charging or refueling infrastructure. And finally, we'll also be evaluating workforce and service networks and whether or not technicians are capable of servicing these technologies and whether or not those technicians are readily available. Again, only commercially mature technologies will be assessed against these MRIs. Market readiness snapshots, such as the mock-up shown here, will be included in this year's strategy. Technologies will score in 25% increments on a scale of 0 to 100% for each indicator. Please note that the indicators shown here do not represent actual market readiness. This is only an example to show how we intend to score and display market readiness levels in the strategy. With that, I believe we're going to open it up for any questions on technology readiness or market readiness.
Thank you, Jesse. So first up, we have Lisa McGee. Lisa, I've unmuted your mic.
Oh, I'm sorry. That was for the last comment. So
okay, thanks. Next up, we have Dan Shaw. Dan, I've unmuted your mic.
Thank you. Yeah, I raised my hand for the last section as well, but I mean, I guess listening to this particular discussion sort of begs the question of to what end are these indicators or this data is being captured, and also shouldn't it would seem prudent to actually rely on some of this data to inform sort of market or fleet segment participation or accessibility. I think to many of the other prior comments regarding concerns about eliminating medium and heavy duty fleets, many of these questions or readiness indicators seem to be important data points that should inform who is in or out, or what market segment is ready or less ready to sort of transition away from incentives. So all very, very useful data and information, but I guess really the point is to what end?
Yeah, it's a very important question. Thanks for raising that, Dan. I think you nailed it. We are assessing each of these indicators for exactly the reason you mentioned, to help inform the investments that CARB is making into these technologies. So whether that's on the tech readiness side and understanding which sorts of programs, whether it's an early stage technology that might be more appropriate for a demo or pilot funding, or these commercially mature technologies that then we know, yes, these are ready for consideration under HVIP or those sorts of commercially mature incentive programs. Similar answer here for market readiness indicators. This is helping understand where more action and indeed funding needs to go in order to help resolve these challenges and see more rapid and more broad market adoption of these technologies. So just for example, like say a technology, it's commercially mature, but we see it scoring really low on infrastructure here in the market readiness. That tells us and tells CARB, hey, maybe it's worth partnering with CEC or the folks working on infrastructure to understand how we can move this along to enable more deployments of that technology. Similarly, if we're seeing that TCO is the biggest challenge, then we know, hey, it's probably early to remove it from incentive programs, those sorts of things.
Got it. So it would seem as if staff is proposing to put the cart before the horse then, in proposing to categorically exclude certain fleet segments beginning as early as next year, prior to having the benefit of this information that you're collecting.
I'll just jump in and say, I think we're trying to collect this information to help better inform our incentive investment decisions, to make sure that we're focusing the incentive dollars that we have in the areas where we need to boost the technology adoption or progression. And so having this data helps us know what those areas are that are most in need of incentive dollars, and kind of how we can shape the policies around that. I think that's really what we're looking at here.
Okay, well, maybe I'm misunderstanding, what the action that CARB took in this current year's funding plan, which is definitively excluding certain market segments beginning as early as next year. So I guess it's just confusing in my mind, why this seemingly kind of backward approach is taking place.
Yeah, and I think that may be a discussion for another venue, but certainly we want to make sure we're looking at the data to help inform these decisions where we're going, and we'll continue to look for input from folks as we move forward on these.
Thank you. Next up, we have Matthew Shrop. Matthew, I have unmuted your mic.
Thank you and good afternoon. And I did have some comments relative to the previous section. However, I'll focus them here on this because I feel like, as the previous commenter had indicated, there's some concern relative to informing decision-making for decisions that have seemingly already been made. And I guess my question is, and I apologize for joining a little bit late initially here, is when can we expect this RMRI to be completed? And will there be a opportunity for formal comments, or is it just going to be part of the overall 3-year investment strategy? This would be my first question.
So we're looking to roll out the first of these as part of this year's draft strategy document. And so there will be an opportunity to comment on those when that comes out. And again, that's going to be in the early October timeframe. So definitely opportunity to comment on that. And then I think as we move forward, we'll be expanding these into other areas and continuing to tinker with and improve them.
Thanks, Jason. And is this going to be utilized for informing the regulatory advanced clean fleet side of the TCO concept, or are these going to be two separate TCO efforts? One on the advanced clean fleet side, one on the MRI?
No, these are just focused on our incentive policies as part of the heavy duty investment strategy.
So market readiness will have nothing to do with what the ultimate regulatory policy reflects.
In the context of the heavy duty investment strategy, no, this is a separate action from what's going on on the regulatory side.
Hey, Matt, if I could just take a second
Peter.
to chime in. I want to make sure that it's clear that, you know, what we're showing here is a really important concept and it's fundamental to the investment strategy. But I know a lot of the conversation today has been about HVIP, and I totally get that because there are significant changes coming to HVIP. But remember that that planning is not done in a vacuum. So when you look at the recommendation that was made to our board last year, there were a number of factors that went into that policy recommendation. It included things like what is the status of the market, but it also included a look at what has been the demand from small fleets in HVIP over time. So we looked at that demand last year in the first opening of HVIP since its long closure. This year, we're keeping a close eye on that, as we said we would do last year. And in fact, we're seeing an increase in participation from small fleets. So we look at a number of factors. Market readiness, yes, it's a very important factor. We look at what kind of demand and what kind of uptake are we seeing from small fleets today, and how can we do better, making sure that we're keeping an eye on those outcomes and making sure that we're generating those air quality and greenhouse gas reductions, especially in the most impacted communities. And then at the same time, keeping a real strong focus on, Matt, as you said, the upcoming regulations, because it's important for us to think about the regulations as an additional driver to uptake of zero emission trucks and buses as well. So making sure that we're delivering those limited state dollars, even though we've been fortunate that we've got strong funding and continued proposed strong funding, but making sure that we're focusing those limited state dollars on the purchase transactions that are being driven by the investment, not simply adding dollars to a transaction that would have otherwise occurred. So the bottom line, my point is that there are a number of factors that go into a policy recommendation. This is one of them, but each and every policy recommendation in the funding plan includes a robust analysis of the factors that go into that recommendation. So just want to make sure that that's clear.
Hey, thank you, Peter. That is clear. And I didn't introduce myself previously for the other callers, which I noticed hasn't been the norm. But I'm Matt Shrop. I'm the CEO of the Harbor Trucking Association. And not to belabor this point too much longer, and I would tend to agree with my colleague Adriano about, you know, allowing fleets to compete within their own fleet size category as opposed to excluding them out, but not necessarily directly related here to this particular conversation that we're having. It's just disconcerting to hear that while we're looking at market readiness for a incentive plan, that it's happening in parallel, and this might not be happening in a vacuum, but it sure does seem pretty siloed, where market readiness for individual segments is happening on the one hand for the regulatory side, which is really the purchase driver. I mean, I get it, electric trucks and hydrogen trucks are pretty cool, but the motivation by fleets is because of the regulatory policy. There, you know, we can talk about sustainability and carbon neutrality, et cetera, but that is an entirely different discussion, obviously. So I just wanted to get a better understanding, and thank you for helping me come to the conclusion here that it's seemingly happening in a different silo. And I'm not, you know, we're bringing an HVIP into this conversation, so I might as well bring in advanced clean fleets, is that this would seem to inform, hopefully, some decision-making about technology readiness on a interim basis leading towards full implementation in 2035. And obviously infrastructure is a major issue. And if we want more small fleets to participate, it's really going to be on a secondary market as opposed to this initial market. And it's encouraging to hear more small fleets are participating. That's what I've been hearing as well. Perhaps a drop in the bucket compared to the total turnover of the 2019 population for drayage, at least, that Advanced Clean Fleet staff is using at 33,000, which is probably higher than that, but again, a different discussion. So appreciating this. And I guess last question on market readiness is, I see and I understand that these are not actual representative of market readiness, but I see a category of HD urban regional / drayage. I would argue that those potentially are three different classifications, especially relative to gross vehicle weight rating and duty cycle. That will we expect that three-prong category to remain, or will it be refined further, which within those categories relative to market readiness?
Thanks for those comments, Matt. And yes, this is really just for illustrative purposes only today. I don't see that we're going to lump together those three categories. I think we were just trying to stick as much as we could on as possible on this chart for today. But no, I would not be looking for that going forward. And I'll also just clarify that we really are not doing this in a silo. We do coordinate with our regulatory team. I just want to highlight that we are doing this market readiness indicator snapshot as part of the heavy duty investment strategy. Not that it doesn't have any relationship to what we're doing on the reg side, but just our focus today is really on the strategy.
Okay, Jason, I totally appreciate that, honestly, and I get it. I'm fearful of seeing one TCO for advanced clean fleets and another TCO for market readiness over the next few years. It's just, I mean, I don't know. In my experience, staff can be a little siloed in what they're doing. I mean, not to mention the other agencies that are involved in this, CEC, some maybe perhaps good Transportation Commission, not sure. So I appreciate the response, and we'll continue on here. But so thank you for the answers.
Understand. Thank you.
Thank you. So we have time for one more question, and I'm going to go to the question and answer box from Christian Corby. Will the market readiness evaluation look at all the GVWR classes that will be regulated by the Advanced Clean Fleets rule? Will it take into account the different body types and duty cycles within each weight class?
I think the short answer is, as I've said, we will be evaluating market readiness for each of the categories of technology applications, the same categories that we look at for technology readiness. So that is what's shown here, with some slight changes on the heavy duty side from last year, given that I believe they were all lumped together last year. And we want to acknowledge that long haul is very different than these more urban or regional applications. We will definitely consider Matt's comment around breaking those down further, perhaps for this market readiness assessment. And then the duty cycle piece, I would say that's what we're hoping to capture in this duty cycle category. I will not promise that we're going to consider every single possible duty cycle out there, particularly because I don't know that anyone has access to that sort of data. But we are assessing just that, common duty cycles within these applications, particularly with respect to weight, payload, and power requirements, looking to see if current technologies are able to meet those requirements, or if there are still some challenges associated with those. So I hope that answers your question.
Thanks, Jesse. With that, I believe we're ready to move on to our next slide.
Yes, thank you, Arya. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Kevin Wakowitz at CalSTART to talk about some emerging opportunities. Kevin?
Yeah, thanks, Jason. And speaking of technology readiness and market readiness, so wanted to go through this list of emerging opportunities, emerging technologies. So CARB obviously recognizes current generation technology and applications. They're moving quickly. A lot of them are technically ready and capable. We just had that discussion. But I think CARB also recognizes that maybe to improve some of the market readiness, the TCO and other factors, new technologies need to be developed and to help improve the cost, overall usability of the product in the marketplace. So kind of listed here are some technology areas that might be considered for future demo or pilot projects in future years. So this is stuff, these are things that maybe aren't eligible for HVIP or core or things like that. Things that need to be proven out in the marketplace before they can make their way into a commercially available product. So just, and this is not meant to be an all-inclusive list at this point, but kind of what CARB is thinking right now, and some of the things that we know are still getting developed and still being improved upon in next generation technology and next generation vehicles. So the first couple there, around fast charge capable batteries, and then the associated onboard high power charging systems on board the vehicles. And this is kind of assuming that other agencies like the CEC are making big investments in some of the high power infrastructure charging systems, but things like, developing high voltage DC bus systems on the vehicles, new cells, new modules, packs, battery management systems, cooling systems, all these things that would enable charging at a megawatt and beyond. And we think this is important technology to develop. It'll really be able to enable some of the longer haul battery electric truck applications that are needed out there today. The next bullet, thinking about fuel cells systems that are out there right now, what is needed to improve the efficiency and cost of some of these systems. So things like lower cost fuel cell stacks, or the onboard storage systems for the fuel cell system, or maybe higher efficiency or improved power density for these systems, as well as maybe what the right architecture system design might be. What kind of onboard battery storage would you need on a fuel cell vehicle? What about some of the hybrid systems that are out there as well? So lot more work to do. Would love to see that some of the cost and the efficiencies improve on the fuel cell side. Advanced battery chemistries. So yeah, solid state gets a lot of attention lately, but yeah, just new chemistries, new form factors, I think will continue to be developed, and are of interest as the medium and heavy duty industry really faces some significant challenges, especially around things like lithium and cobalt, and domestic lithium and cobalt supply. So looking at new types of batteries, what's going to be needed to develop those and prove them out in the field. So I think CARB is definitely interested in taking a look at those things. Other new technologies, again, looking at onboard energy storage approaches. So things like battery swapping, maybe wireless charging, catenary, or other conductive charging approaches that just might enable better charging of the vehicles, more, works better in fleet operations. There's a lot of different things being looked at. So I think CARB wants to enable a way to develop some of these technologies and get these demonstrated out there in a fleet. And then the last bullet there, a lot of talk around, I call it V to X, but yeah, V to B, V to G. So what can we do with bidirectional power capability on board the vehicles? Maybe developing these capabilities to look at emergency operation or grid resiliency, or maybe monetizing the vehicles or the energy storage through grid services programs. These things are all still need to be developed and proven out. So this category and these opportunities will really look to help and push some of these new technologies along the TRL scale, and hopefully eventually will make their way into commercial available incentive programs over the next few years. But again, CARB staff is always open to hearing about these and other new enabling technologies and where they are in the commercialization spectrum. So if you have other things that need to be looked at, please let us know, and we'll look for ways to get them into this program, and hopefully eventually into the market and deploy more zero emission vehicles down the road. So I think, Jason, I'll throw it back to you. I don't know if we wanted to stop for questions or comments there.
Yeah, I think this is a good time to stop and take some questions and comments.
Okay. All right, let's start with the raised hands. First up, we have Karen Lisa Atkinson. Karen, I have unmuted your mic.
Hi there, thanks. This is my first meeting. I'm not sure how I got invited, but I'm really grateful. My background is I co-founded and was the Chief Technology Officer for the first fund on the planet for carbon reduction technology and climate change technology back in 2004. And we couldn't do it in the States because of the political climate, so we did it in London, and then stayed on board until every stock exchange on the planet had categories for clean tech and green tech and carbon reduction technology. My question is very basic. One of the parts of our investment portfolio at that time was transportation. And due to regulations and cost, especially out-of-pocket costs for people, especially in the UK and Europe, what we ended up investing in were kits that convert trucks and cars from being gas-based to being alternative energy-based, whether it was electric, going from fossil fuel to clean fuel, or fossil fuel to electric, or fossil fuel to hydrogen. And that was pretty successful for us because individuals could afford to buy these kits and literally go to a kit car or transportation conversion station and have their vehicles translated into the vehicle they wanted to, the one that they were choosing for their company or for their personal household. They had that choice of how to convert the vehicle to be a low emission vehicle. And so since I'm new to this whole process, my question is simply, when you're presenting the data to us today, are you presenting data as in there's an expectation that everyone's going to buy new vehicles? Or are you actually looking at conversion kits?
Well, thank you for that question. I think certainly we look at both new vehicles and retrofits as part of the whole portfolio of solutions, whether it's light duty or heavy duty. I think we know there are a lot of different options, and some of our programs do allow funding of conversion. Some of them are more focused on new vehicles, but there's certainly a lot of options. And I don't know, Kevin, if you have any other thoughts on this, but I also just want to note that it's important that we make sure that the end users, that those fleets are also supported with the appropriate service and repair programs, no less than you would get in a brand new vehicle. So.
Yeah, I would just add, I think that's been one of the challenges in the past with some of the retrofit products that have been out there, is the serviceability or just availability of service and parts. But as it relates to this category, overall, I think if you can get your EO and get certified to be in a program like HVIP, it could be a retrofit or a new build vehicle. I think that's correct, right, Jason?
From the data point of view that you're presenting, though, is it inclusive of everything, or everything that might possibly be on the table as things roll out over the next decade? Or is the data specifically from the point of view of buying new vehicles? I just want to be clear about what I'm looking at when you present your data.
Yeah, and what you're seeing on the screen now, I think, are categories of technology that we would love to see developed. I don't know if like a retrofit, maybe it's a low cost or some other new advancement that might need to be developed and would be eligible for, this is more for demo and pilot type projects where they're not production ready vehicles, but once they are available, whether that's a brand new, all new vehicle or a retrofitted vehicle, I think as long as it meets the requirements for some of the incentive programs, we would expect people to be able to purchase those as well. So any of this data or technology that we're talking about here, I think would fit in either place as long as it meets the requirements of the programs.
Yeah, that's a good point, because identifying these technologies are great for being able to evolve to the point where we're creating vehicles from scratch that meet all of the requirements, and aren't using rare earth elements. And but if you add to any of the categories you presented today, retrofitting the currently existing vehicles and making it affordable for the average householder or company owner who has multiple vehicles, then I think that's a great technology to add to your list. And thank you very much for everything you're doing.
Thank you. Appreciate your feedback.
So I'm going to read a few questions and comments from the Q&A box specific to this discussion. Our first comment is from Eileen Tutt from Cali TC. Vehicle grid integration, VGI, is the terminology used to capture vehicle to everything, or V2X. It would probably be good, and we recommend sticking with the existing terminology rather than creating a new term for VGI. We now have a question from Adriano Martinez. Is there funding attached to these emerging technologies? If so, how will those be administered?
And Jason, I don't know if you want to take a shot at that. I believe there will be. I don't know that it's been defined yet.
Yeah, I think really what we're looking at with these emerging opportunities is we just want to highlight some of the things that are coming out now that are either just becoming available or on the horizon that we think really are going to have an impact. And so most likely as these start to roll out, they'll be part of upcoming demonstration and pilot projects to begin with. And then as those technologies, as these new next generation technologies or emerging opportunities are proven, then they'll be rolled into more commercially available products. And then those will go into become part of our commercially available incentive programs like HVIP or CORE. So it'll be a process, but really this is more just to highlight kind of what's up and coming and kind of what we're seeing. And just also, we're going to be talking about things more in the upcoming funding plan workshop, covering all of these different areas.
Yeah, I would just add on that it's a way to acknowledge that these things we recognize they're needed, and if we can build them into some new demo or pilot program, these are things that we would be interested in maybe trying to demonstrate in those programs, and give everyone the opportunity to try to fully develop it and demonstrate it in a commercial setting.
Thanks, guys. We have two questions from Tom Kiket. Is the list of emerging opportunities in the slide examples for funding by the Emerging Opportunities Fund in the governor's budget? And then, are the emerging opportunities limited to zero emission technologies?
So I'll take a first shot at this. So first of all, no, even though these are called emerging opportunities and what's in the budget is called emerging opportunities, they're not necessarily the same thing. These are really just things that are now emerging that we see coming forward. The emerging opportunities in the budget are really more focused on more broadly demonstration projects in the heavy duty space. So I guess you could say there's some potential overlap there, but they're not really designed to be the same thing here.
Thank you. And then the last question on this topic in the Q&A box is from Matthew Shrop, and it's a question about CEC's involvement in funding advanced charging technologies. Ben, is that something you'd be able to answer?
I am happy to try to help answer.
Great, thank you.
Sorry, I'm pulling it up here.
So what is CEC doing to support advanced charging technologies?
Sure, and I'll be speaking about this a little bit later in one of our projects, highlighting that Kevin, in fact, is aware of and involved in. The Research and Development Division at CEC, which I work with, has made several investments in advanced alternative high-power charging technologies. The one I think that's most germane to today's discussion is a project called the Electric Truck Utilization Research Center. A big thrust of that is establishing some testing capabilities and conducting some laboratory testing and validation of these high power charging technologies, both the hardware as well as the communications and signaling, to ensure their safe operation. So we're supporting certainly laboratory testing and development, as well as some contracts with national labs doing, similar standards and testing work on megawatt level charging. So I'll talk a little bit more about that later, but if there are specific questions, always happy to dive in a little bit more in depth. I think one thing I will say that's a little bit reflective of the funding stream that the Research and Development Division works with. We have not done, although we've done some, great work in advanced battery technologies that can charge at higher C rates and have greater energy density. We haven't really done a lot on the some of the components Kevin was mentioning, the on-vehicle high power charging components, the thermal management. And so, that's one area where, I think there's opportunities for us to think together with our sister agencies about how to expand. And Matthew, welcome more specific questions, or hope you can stick around a little bit later to hear some of the description of this project that we're getting started now.
Thank you, Ben. We do have time for one more question, and Tom Kickett did write in the question and answer box. Once again, he wanted to follow up with, will the projects for the governor's emerging opportunities funding be limited to zero emission related technologies or pilots only?
Yeah, we really do expect to see a continued focus on zero emission technologies in our upcoming demonstration and pilot projects wherever possible, but we are continuing to engage with our stakeholders on both zero emission and other technologies across the whole heavy duty landscape, whether that's off-road, marine, locomotives. We also have this concept of green zones, kind of the whole ecosystem, et cetera. So I just want to make it clear that it's not only zero emission that really is our focus, just because of, the governor's executive order, all the things that are really kind of driving this. The funding itself in a lot of our programs is really driving zero emission, but it's not certainly in the demonstration space and with these emerging opportunities, it's not strictly limited to that.
Thank you, Jason. I think that is all the time we have for the Q&A for this particular section. I'm sorry to those who still have their hands raised, but we will definitely try and get to you at the end of this discussion.
All right, thanks, Arya. So now I'm going to turn this back over to Jessie Lund to talk a little bit more about our metrics as part of the heavy duty investment strategy. Jessie?
Thanks, Jason. So another one of the main components of the heavy duty investment strategy is the development of a set of quantifiable metrics. These metrics help us to more effectively determine how successful our investments have been in achieving our goals. The metrics are grouped into the 3 broad categories that you see on the screen: creating healthy communities, growing the green economy, and supporting technology evolution. On the next slide, you can see some of the metrics that we track each year, which we plan to update for this year's strategy. As you can see, we report on everything from the percent of vouchers that fund vehicles deployed in disadvantaged communities to the growing number of manufacturers offering incentive program eligible vehicles and equipment. I do want to note that while historically much of this data has come directly from HVIP, this year we will also include metrics from the Clean Off-Road Equipment or CORE voucher program. I do want to note that CORE has only had 1 major round of funding so far, so we don't expect those numbers to be incredibly high this year, but note that CORE will be reopening later this year, and we look forward to future years sharing those numbers as well. Also new this year, we plan to include metrics on fleet acceptance and behavior change. This is something we committed to in last year's strategy. And for example, thanks to a recent survey of HVIP recipients, we now know that 3/4 of respondents who were able to procure zero-emission vehicles through the program indicated plans to purchase additional zero-emission vehicles within the next few years. This sort of feedback and data are crucial for CARB's investment strategy, and I want to emphasize the importance of responding to surveys like the HVIP one as accurately and in as timely a manner as possible. We hope to see a much higher response rate for next year's survey. And I just want to call out that those metrics, that data that we're tracking through surveys and other avenues, are being reflected in this metrics section of the investment strategy. At this point, I believe we've got some time for Q&A on metrics.
Yes, we do. First up, I'm going to go back to the raised hands. First up, we have, excuse me. I do want to remind everyone to please state your name and affiliation when you're called on, that we have been getting that comment in the question and answer box. Jason, Jason, I have unmuted your mic.
Thank you. It's Jason Caranto with Hyzon Motors. I wanted to make sure that, and granted, it's going back to that slide. I just was looking at some of the proposals on there. Do you have a vision of how many megawatt chargers you're imagining being in the LA basin? I mean, are we talking 100, 1,000?
I'm not quite sure what you're referring to here, but
in the last slide, there was a discussion about the commercialization of megawatt chargers, in particular, I believe it was in the bus sector. So I was just curious, what is what's the electrical load look like in the LA basin, and how many chargers are you envisioning in 5 years, 10 years? At the megawatt capacity?
Okay. I appreciate the question. It's sort of a very detailed question that we're not necessarily focused on as part of our larger heavy duty strategy. But
if you create 1,000 megawatt charging stations, it implies you're going to have a significant amount of electrical generation to support that. And I just want to make sure that ARB understands the implication of large scale commercialization of that level of charging.
Certainly.
And with that, I'll drop off.
Yeah, no, certainly. And I can ask our counterparts at the Energy Commission to chime in here as well, but that is certainly something that we're looking at. We work with the utilities, the Energy Commission. We have a whole group looking at what are the specific charging needs by location. I know CalSTART has worked on a tool that highlights what are the areas where we're seeing charging needs come up and how does it match up with the available electricity. So a lot of those efforts are underway. Again, this is sort of outside of my area, but we can certainly connect you with the folks at the Energy Commission, the utilities, all the different groups who are working on addressing this very issue.
Yeah, maybe I'll jump in quickly because I can't bite my tongue on this exciting topic. You know, I think we certainly all discuss a lot together, and we have a lot of different modeling tools that we're using to answer, you know, effectively that question: how many chargers, what power level, where do they need to be, when do they get deployed? I am happy to, you know, follow up and connect you with some of those, you know, as Jason said, outside of this proceeding and discussion, but there's whole other efforts working on that. You know, I think it's, of course, an exercise of modeling under a lot of uncertainty and imagining what the future is going to be with rapidly changing technologies and behaviors. That said, I think it's a good example of, you know, how some of the agencies are really working together and sharing across these different, you know, boundaries, institutional boundaries. Just yesterday at the Energy Commission business meeting, we had CARB presenting, you know, some of your results on exactly, you know, how much additional generation capacity, how much additional distribution capacity is going to be needed. I want to point out that the Energy Commission just adopted yesterday a new high electrification planning targets, which is kind of a new process in our electricity demand forecast that feeds into the utility planning procurements, and you know, some of those signals are working their way through all the different agencies and hopefully getting some greater capacity out there when we need it.
Thanks, Ben.
Thank you. Next up, we have Matt Shrop. Matt, I have unmuted your mic.
Yes, hello. Matt Schrapp again with the Harbor Trucking Association. And just to follow up real quick on this statement, I know that we're in this metrics of success, which I can appreciate without a doubt. Just a couple questions relative to the battery swapping on the emerging technologies and the discussions that we've had with OEMs, that isn't something that's on their immediate horizon. So is it something that you guys, you know, obviously it was one bullet of the emerging technologies slide, or, you know, emerging possibilities, but is it something that you guys will be pushing from a categorical standpoint insofar as approaching OEMs to say, hey, figure something out relative to battery swapping, we'll have some money available for you? Or is that just more kind of come as you are? If you have battery swapping plans, so to speak, then come and try to access some of this emerging technology money? I guess are you guys encouraging any of your OEM partners through CalSTART to look at particular pathways for emerging technologies, or is it just, again, come as you are?
Matt, I'll take a shot at that. We obviously have some CalSTART members that are interested in that. So yeah, industry would like to see opportunities to develop and demonstrate that technology. And I think the emerging technologies list that I just showed is basically just signaling that, yeah, we'd be open to that. Maybe there's a future demo and pilot category that would allow, it would be, you know, maybe a drayage truck, right, that could have battery swapping available. So making those kind of programs available to demonstrate that technology. So that's just something we want to keep the door open on. I don't know how much we'll encourage it or push it, but definitely we know it's out there, and we know it could be a solution that could really improve the business case. So keeping the door open and making that opportunity available is what we were trying to do there.
Appreciate that. And did you guys survey any of your, at least on the CalSTART membership side, about what, you know, kind of the top 10, granted some are proprietary per OEM, but about where they are looking at potentially going into the emerging technology realm? I mean, for the most part, it seems like zero emission trucks and infrastructure are still sort of emerging from a commercialization standpoint, full commercialization at least. So, or again, is it just sort of the doors open? If you want to step through it, go ahead. Or were you guys basing those emerging technologies on conversations with OEMs about things that they're potentially working on?
Yeah, mostly conversations, not any kind of official survey, but we are aware maybe not. So I don't know that we've had a lot of conversations with the OEMs on the battery swapping, but I know high power charging is something that we have engaged in conversations with them and trying to understand where they're at and what else they would need to get that technology out and on the road. So a lot of it is just discussions with industry and understanding, kind of what's in the next wave for them once they get these first wave applications out there and functional in the marketplace.
Great. And on that high power charging, I think I put a question in the chat. It was more about a kind of a comment and some curiosity, because I believe you said that we assume, quote unquote, CEC is working to support this type of higher capacity charging, not necessarily that they're providing pathways through incentives for doing such, but I just wanted some clarification that you guys don't know for sure if they're working on that. I mean, you're assuming they are. I don't know if anyone from CEC is on the call. That seems rare these days in the ARP workshops, but that was the question. That was my point.
Yeah, I know Ben Wender is going to talk about that a little bit later, but we don't assume we know if this REDA program that Ben, I think, is going to talk about, that is to develop and demonstrate a megawatt charger in Southern California that can be demonstrated with some. Now we need to get the vehicles capable of accepting that level of charge. So we know that CEC is looking at some of these emerging technologies from the infrastructure side. So I think CARB is wanting to keep up on the vehicle side and make sure that we'll have technology demonstration available for the vehicles.
Thanks, because it just makes my members nervous. I mean, REDA is one thing, but when we hear regulators, even in CalStart's capacity, saying, well, we assume that they're doing that, it kind of gives us pause. So thank you for
my apologies for using the word assume. I should, we know they are.
Semantics. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry.
Thank you. Next up, we have Lisa McGee. Lisa, I have unmuted your mic.
Hi there, this is Lisa McGee, Green Power Motor Company. Thank you for this information. I just have some comments on being able to, I think, take some of these metrics and data and make it a little bit more meaningful on the fleet side. For the manufacturers, as it relates to that data, if we could have information related to the, I guess, actual vehicle, I guess even vehicle types, as well as the money. It seems like this is all aggregated into the history of HVIP. I think since we're moving into the zero emissions category, it'd be nice, for example, what we're seeing is what, I think more like almost 6,000 vehicles that have been purchased on the vehicle purchase sides that are EVs, but only 2,000 of those actually delivered. And I think some of that information could be really helpful for everybody in the field, understanding how far and how fast we're moving currently compared to in the past. I think that really speaks to the commercial viability. And also some of the new OEMs that have entered the market. One thing I have is how you're going to be tracking, I think, some of the uptick that has really happened in the last year, and compared to what you guys have been monitoring for the percentages as it relates to soft caps and so forth. And what kind of measure stick are you using for that as it relates to, you've got several OEMs that have over 500, and I know you put together a program for the soft cap to be monitored at 100. And so having that information, I think, also available for fleets might be important to make sure that we're getting them delivered and not just purchased and maybe delayed. So I'd like to get some feedback on that.
All right. Well, thanks for those comments, Lisa. Appreciate that. And I'd like to point out that the HVIP website does have a data tool that gives up-to-date information on HVIP specific data. So that is a great resource for you to find out what's happening. Where are we in terms of both vouchers requested and redeemed? And so I'm going to ask maybe one of my colleagues to drop that link into the chat, but there's a lot of data there that I think you'll find is really helpful. And maybe if you see something that's not there, let us know. But basically today, we just want to get some feedback from you all on, is this useful data that we're looking at here? Is there other data that we should be looking to collect? And, you know, what's going to help us in our process of shaping policy around heavy duty incentives that's going to be helpful. Thanks, Jesse.
Thanks, everyone. Next up, we have Dusty Garland, and Dusty will be our last speaker, I think. Dusty?
Hi, this is Dusty Garland from Peterbilt. I wanted to string together a couple of thoughts. We've spoken about, you know, advanced clean fleet has come up, equity in terms of small and large fleets. As Mr. Christensen said, I know a lot of us think about HVIP, which is absolutely true. A lot of us with incentivization, that's exactly where our mind goes. And then we talked about metrics and market readiness. And so one of the thoughts that I had just that will drive some of that is, especially as we're looking at market readiness and cost parity, I would urge those metrics to be based on not just cost parity of a new diesel truck with a new zero emission truck, but the purchase that small fleets would make. So if HVIP is bound to say that, you know, fleets of 100 and greater and fleets of 50 and greater are no longer going to be eligible for those incentives, and so we're going to give them to fleets we think are now going to be the major adopters because cost parity is there. Those fleets under 50 trucks, it's likely that their new purchase is not a brand new diesel vehicle. Oftentimes, it's coming from the used market, and so we may say a new diesel vehicle, total cost of ownership, cost parity with zero emission is there. But if they're buying 5- and 6-year-old vehicles for their fleet, then that's a much larger incentive that's needed for them to make that jump. And so once again, I would just hate for that to be restricted to small fleets under the assumption that cost parity is there for them, only to find that it's not. And then those fleets that are willing to make the jump no longer be eligible. So just as we're measuring all of these things and moving forward into where now there's regulation and not just incentivization for the programs, I just think we need to pay really close attention to how we measure some of those things and what cost really is based on the fleet sizes we're aiming for.
Thanks for that feedback, Dusty.
There are no more raised hands, but we do have a couple of comments from Lisa McGee in the Q&A box. I'm going to read them for the purposes of the recording. I share some comments below to address the equity lens. Data demonstrates that by population of registered commercial motor vehicles, that small size and private fleets make up 80% of commercial motor vehicles. The HVIP program has primarily been the incentive for EV purchases, and the method of a purchase has been on a first come, first serve process. The dealers and OEMs are submitting first the applications that include the highest volume of purchases. This means that any purchases that are 1 or 2 vehicles is at the back end and has tended to be a small size fleet. Therefore, the smaller size fleet is disadvantaged in this method and has not been able to participate the same as larger size fleets. The program has been around for 10 years. It is critical that small size fleets have the fair opportunity to access funding today as they are facing mandates. Continued, not only has the first come, first serve system created a disadvantage for small size fleets, so has the investment cost. They do not have the same capital and credit to qualify for vehicles that are 100% more expensive. Lastly, all charging infrastructure funding requires generally a minimum of 2 trucks and now is moving to 6 trucks. Again, first time adoption for small size fleets has been a challenge when they are interested. This is the first year. There is now a mechanism to ensure them a pathway for the opportunity to purchase an EV. Truck dealerships are voicing the same concerns as they are the entities that serve this market. In some cases, a method for the small size fleet customer has been leasing and shorter term rentals by dealership. but this process is not allowed in HVIP. As such, small size fleets are challenged. CARB should show small size fleets data and how much of the funding has or has not included small size fleets. Those are the comments that are related to this section for the metrics. I don't know if you'd like to, actually, we do need to move on because it's now 2:30. Jason?
Thanks, Arya. I'll just note that our innovative small e-fleets project launches this year. And so it's going to give us an opportunity to really dig into the whole small fleets arena and get more input from smaller fleets on what their experience is, what their needs are. And so I think as we go forward, we're going to learn a lot more and have a lot more information in that area. And also in just a little bit, we'll hear an update on SB 372, which is another area that I think we're going to see a lot of these small fleet issues getting addressed as we go forward. All right, so as we go on here, this next section, we want to talk about our draft 3-year priorities table. This is another key component of each year's strategy, our draft recommendations table. And this table shows what are the things that we've identified as the 3-year low carbon transportation investment priorities. It essentially provides a snapshot in time, and it incorporates a rolling 3-year funding horizon, expanding on the levels of funding that were detailed as part of last year's strategy. These funding recommendations build on the core priorities, which have been updated to reflect the current status and direction of technologies for this year. And recommended funding levels, as they get developed, will be presented by fiscal year and by stage of technology for demonstration, pilot, and commercial, with the highest priorities for state funding listed in the table. I also want to note that many smaller vehicle and equipment types have been aggregated as it's nearly impossible to list everything here in one table. So this year's recommendations will start with fiscal year 2023-24, continue with 24-25, and add a new third year of 2025-26. Some of the highlights of changes proposed in this year's draft table include prioritizing the need for zero emission line haul rail to distinguish it from short haul rail and switcher applications, calling out the need for zero emission mining in the heavy duty off-road space, prioritizing the demonstration of zero emission aviation in year 3, bringing zero emission ag equipment more fully into the pilot phase, continued expansion of zero emission cargo handling equipment, things like heavy lifts, rubber tired gantry cranes, and top picks in the pilot phase, and affirming the continued need for zero emission ecosystems that support an entire fleet of vehicles and equipment. This can be for things like construction, mining, or a road paving operation in both demonstration and pilot phases, and zero emission long haul trucks coming into the first year of the commercial phase. So with that, I'll pause to take some questions and comments on our draft priorities table for this year.
We have one hand raised, Jamie Levin. Jamie, I have unmuted your mic.
Hey, thank you. Thanks, Jason. Jamie Levin with the Center for Transportation and the Environment. You've heard me go on about this, but I recently had various meetings with the governor's GoBiz office, which is going to be the focal point for this hydrogen hub. And one of the key questions that surfaces both, not just with CARB, but CEC and CalSTA and all the agencies that are utilizing the cap and trade funds, how this is going to be leveraged against the DOE hydrogen $8 billion hydrogen hub program. So I'm wondering, Jason, has there been focused internal discussion within CARB that somehow some of this money, if not this current year, but in the next year, is going to be set aside or be used from a discretionary standpoint in order to go after the federal dollars?
Okay, thanks for that question, Jamie. And as you know, we continue to work with our partners at the Energy Commission, looking at the infrastructure needs specific to the heavy duty sector and how can we take advantage of opportunities like this that come along. I don't have a specific answer for you at this time, but we're hearing you loud and clear that we need to take advantage of this and we need to keep working on it. So thank you for bringing this up and bringing it before us.
And you know, Jason, I would just add to my previous comment that the state of California, it's for the state of California to lose, given the advances that California has made in hydrogen and zero emission, the fuel cell and the like. And so we just have to be, as a statewide perspective, very strategic to get a good share of those funds out of the Department of Energy. But it isn't an automatic, right? It's going to take a very skillful effort to put together an application. We'll all know more on the 6th of June when it is now rumored that they're going to release the first FOA for this effort. So just want you to be mindful and keep that on the front burner of CARB staff, and as you discussed with CEC and the governor's office and others. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks, Jamie.
So we do have a comment / question that popped up in the Q&A box from Karen Lisa Atkinson. The chat is disabled, so to answer your questions about what extra data could be gathered, one of the important issues to the consumers is data that reflects how many people own their vehicles, how many people lease their vehicles, how many people are in debt, payout before owning their vehicles, how long is the average debt paid down in order to own the vehicles. Are those debt contracts so long when the customer never owns their vehicle before technology or regulations have changed? How does vehicle conversion or low carbon emission vehicle purchases affect their insurance costs? Can vehicle insurance costs be lowered to create more incentives to go low carbon emission vehicles at point of purchase? Can specific low carbon special stations, i.e. smog check stations, be set up to either convert vehicles or repair converted vehicles or do maintenance for low carbon emission vehicles?
All right,
I know I know those were a lot of questions. If you need me to repeat it or you want me to single in on a single question, please let me know.
All right, thanks, Arya. So I'll just note that these are a lot of things that do come up in our regular discussions, but most of these happen in project-specific discussions, in project-specific work group meetings. We have meetings on our truck loan program, on SB 372. We also have similar meetings on the light duty side. And so a lot of these questions are asked and being discussed, and we'll have another opportunity as well at the funding plan workshop that I mentioned coming up on July 21st. So we don't typically get into that level of detail in these work groups on the heavy duty investment strategy, but we're certainly welcome any feedback that our stakeholders have if there are things that they want us to consider as we develop this document going forward.
So Jason, Karen actually clarified that those weren't questions she was asking, but rather questions about what data can be collected.
Okay. Yeah, and some of those things we have data for, and some of them we don't, but we are looking to expand the data that we have as much as possible. As we mentioned earlier, we're starting to build on the data that we have in HVIP because we do have a very robust data set there. We have a number of years worth of data collected. And so to the extent that we have that data, we are collecting it and reporting it, as I mentioned. And so for other areas, I think as we get our hands on the data, we will add those in. But again, a lot of this data we just simply do not have at this point. And so it's going to be a process of being able to collect the data and then report on it.
Thank you, Jason. Next up with their raised hand is Michael Faust. Michael, I have unmuted your mic. Michael, you'll need to unmute on your end. Hello, Michael? Okay. It doesn't look like, it looks like Michael is having technical difficulties. But next up, we have Lisa Atkinson. Lisa, I've unmuted your mic.
Thank you. Yeah, so the those weren't questions I was asking. It's just you had asked us to make suggestions for any data that might be missing. And since the chat box is disabled, it's the only way I could send you some suggestions. The other suggestion I have is a meeting that I attended a couple weeks ago was between Berkeley, California, China Climate Change Institute, and it was a meeting between the people working in California climate change issues here and people in China. So it was China-California conversation. And the reason why I think you should connect with the Berkeley, California, China Climate Institute is because one of the things they're working on is something that's happening globally, which is replacing cap and trade with a completely different system, which is emission trade system, EMS. And so before you go too far down the cap and trade road, check in with them because that's actually being replaced by a whole other system called emission trade system. And so it's just a suggestion. I can put their contacts in the box if you want me to.
Great. Yeah, thank you for that suggestion.
You're welcome.
Lisa, really quick, can you just state your affiliation?
My affiliation?
Yes.
You mean who I work for?
Yes.
I work for myself.
Okay.
I don't know how I got invited to this meeting, but I did. My company, Soliton Images, but as I said, I was co-founder and chief technology for the first low carbon technology fund, which was back in 2004.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Jason, we don't have any more raised hands and we're about ready to move on to the next topic. So I'll hand it back to you.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right, so next up on our agenda, we have Kevin Wakowitz, who's going to talk a little bit about some potential industry examples that we'll be looking to include in this year's strategy. Kevin?
Yeah, thanks, Jason. So kind of circling around, we looked at things that might still get invested in for demos and pilots. But in this year's investment plan, we want to, again, try to include examples of technologies or business models that have been already deployed and have been encouraged by CARB programs. So just good examples of things that are out there that are working. Last year, I think we included 6 examples in the investment strategy, showcasing transit buses in the ICT rule, clean transportation jobs update, new developments in heavy duty fuel cell technology, off-road designs that are out there, small manufacturers and fleets. So we did kind of talk about some of the successes there in last year's report. And then also, the influence of port activities on some of the zero emission equipment demand that's out there. So that's in last year's investment plan that is published and available on the web. This year, we're looking to, put out some similar industry or market examples. And this is, again, not all inclusive, but just some of the topics that we're thinking about including right now. So one of the things we've been hearing about is driver health improvements from some of the maybe zero emission regional trucks or other types of trucks, but possibly trying to look at some case studies or driver feedback that we've seen coming to light, and really try to highlight that. So if anyone has any good examples in this area, please let us know. We'd be happy to try to showcase it in this year's investment strategy as well. Electrification as a service. So we see this as a big new opportunity. I think we kind of just talked about that a little bit, the need for small fleets and, infrastructure needs from small fleets and different business models. So there's quite a few organizations that are starting to provide this service, whether it's an all-in lease or maybe it's a lease or some kind of a purchase program aimed at duplicating used truck purchases for some of those markets. But again, we'd like to highlight some of these case studies that are out there now and just give examples of what kind of things we are trying to promote in this investment strategy, and really this category trying to help bridge the gap between vehicles and infrastructures as well as upfront capital needs for some of these small fleets. Battery electric locomotives, these have been highlighted before in some of the past investment plans, but things are been developing here. So we would like to, again, highlight some of the technology advancements or some of the use case examples that are out there. I know there's one, BNSF has a battery electric locomotive project in the San Joaquin Valley. So maybe a topic on that. Zero emission TRUs, kind of the same comment there. They're out there, they're continuing to make some impacts, as well as other electrified equipment by a single fleet. So some of these multi-vehicle zero emission facilities that have started operations, they've got trucks, they've got forklifts, they've got maybe electric TRUs that need power as well, but really trying to understand what a good integrated operation might look like with not only trucks, but also off-road equipment and some of these other technologies, and also trying to back to the grid integration discussion we were having, looking at what some of those facilities are doing to try to mitigate the load on the grid. So distributed energy resources such as solar on site, managed charging or energy storage on site to really help manage the loads that these new electrified zero emission vehicles or equipment might be adding to the facility. And then one other area, maybe zero emission transit buses, and as well as just a lot of new increasing numbers of commercially available trucks and off-road equipment. So I think there's some really good success stories we can show there. The last bullet there talking about our June 8th event in Fontana. So I think we've got over 30 on-road and a few yard tractors as well, but over 30 different models of zero emission trucks that are going to be available for purchase. And you can show up, you can touch them, ride them, drive them. So if you're interested in that, but probably that'll be a good example, just trying to look at the breadth of vehicles that are commercially available and available for purchase now. So, and I'll just put a quick plug in there. If you'd like to attend that, if you're in town June 8th, you can register at zeroemissiontrucks.org. And you can get included in that event and see what's available out there. But we would like to include some of these types of examples of commercial successes or just use cases in the investment plan. So if you have any other examples, things you'd like to see highlighted, please let us know. We'd be happy to try to include those in the in this year's investment strategy. So thank you.
Thanks, Kevin. So again, we love to get your feedback on what types of examples we should include this year. So if there's anything else you're aware of that you think would be a good fit, please let us know about it. So Arya, do you have any questions or comments?
There are no raised hands, but we do have a few older questions and comments in the Q&A box. So I'm going to start with the oldest and work our way forward, and that's simply because there are no raised hands. From Jerry Rohn, we have 4 patents that describe 100% clean transportation truck replacement, HEFF. It is old white guy owned, but the clean air would go to the underserved community. It is self-driving eventually, so this is not job creation either. Clean air is important to all, not just a subgroup. Omar Gonzalez agrees with Jamie in read the TCO, or the total cost of ownership. Small fleets are concerned by overall cost of infrastructure and trucks, so they want to see a scale of the technology, which is driven by larger fleets. Jason Carantano says that I agree with Jamie regarding the pursuit of the DOE Hydrogen Hub program. Hyzon is working with GoBiz and would urge CalStart Carb and CEC to engage with this activity. Lisa Atkinson says carbon emission trade system, the PDF, inside look at China and California's carbon markets that China created recently was presented at a joint meeting with Berkeley, California, China Climate Change Institute, CCCI, is very interesting. It presents the China National ETS market, which they are creating. The PDF presented by California was Key Governance Issues in California's Carbon Cap and Trade System, May 2022. You can connect with Alex Wang at UCLA, who is a part of CCCI. Those are, oh, I'm sorry, I missed one question from David Teasdale. What are plans to ensure workforce training dollars are allocated to support these efforts? And that was to the previous slide, or the previous slides.
Okay, thanks for that. We do have a number of projects that already include workforce training and development funding as part of the project. In fact, a number of our demonstration projects have that. We do also have a larger workforce training and development project that's a standalone project that's part of our overall funding plan this year. And so there will be some more information coming out about that. It is an ongoing area that we recognize the need for, and we continue to work with our partners on raising awareness of the need there and making sure that it's covered. But if there are specific areas, please don't hesitate to let us know if you have suggestions for areas that need it more than others, or areas that need it specifically. All right, and it sounds like that may be it for comments for now. So I'm going to now hand this off. We have an update on SB 372 as well as SB 1403, but first with an SB 372 overview, I will turn this over to Danielle Lawrence. Danielle?
Thank you, Jason. Alrighty, so staff has been working to further develop SB 372, which is the medium and heavy duty zero emission vehicle fleet purchasing assistance program. The goal of this program is to make financing tools and non-financial supports available to fleets that are transitioning to zero emission vehicles. Staff has been working on an outreach and community engagement plan, and this effort will kick off in the summertime with a listening session in July. A big component of this effort is to talk to fleets, communities, and other stakeholders to determine what fleets need to support the transition to zero emission and what gaps currently exist among the tools that are already available and how CARB can help fill those gaps. Staff is already meeting one-on-one with various stakeholders, and we are open to suggestions on who we should be talking to and who we should meet with. We also proposed a new pilot with the California Energy Commission, and this is the proposed ZE truck loan pilot. This will combine financing for both zero emission vehicles and charging or fueling infrastructure into a comprehensive loan package. This is just one piece of the larger overall SB 372 effort. So the pilot will be included in the draft funding plan that will be released in June before the final funding plan workshop on July 21st that Jason already mentioned. As I said, please reach out to us if you'd like to meet with us one-on-one or you have suggestions on who we should be meeting with. And also keep an eye out for an announcement for the listening session because that has not yet been announced yet, and that will be scheduled for July. So thank you. And at this point, I'm going to toss it over to Eric Patton to go ahead and give an update on our SB 1403 efforts.
Thanks, Danielle. Yes, good afternoon, everybody. I'm just gonna do a recap of the SB 1403 report. As many of you may recall.
Hi, Kevin, it's Kathy Polly.
Oh, hi, Kathy. Thank you.
Got some background noise.
Is now a good time?
Yeah, it's good.
Okay, cool. And
Sorry about the interruption. But as many of you may recall and have heard about the Senate Bill 1403, which mandates that CARB, in consultation with CEC, provide a report annually on the state's school bus incentive programs. This report updates the milestones achieved by incentive programs and the projected need for funding, considering the statewide school bus inventory, turnover, and useful life. The report also includes a discussion of zero-emission school buses, their role in the transformation to meet California's air quality and greenhouse gas reduction goals, and case studies of school districts that have incorporated zero-emission school buses in their fleets. We also plan to provide an update of all the school bus funding sources and plan to include new sources of funding in this year's report. CARB staff plans to update the estimated number of school buses operating in California and the composition of the population by fuel type operating in the state. Diesel fueled buses are CARB's main area of focus and concern because diesel particulate matter is a toxic air contaminant. CARB has a long history of funding school bus cleanup projects and implementing pollution reducing laws for school buses to reduce school children's exposure to both cancer causing and smog forming pollution. In consultation with CEC, CARB will update the 2021's SB 1403 report, including milestones achieved, updates on incentive programs, and updates on the projected need for funding considering the school bus inventory, turnover, and useful life. If you have any questions or concerns about the report, please contact me or any of us in the panel. Thank you for participating in the meeting today. And with that, I'll pass it back to Arya. Do we have any questions?
We do. We have one raised hand from Lauren Navarro. Lauren, I have unmuted your mic.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi, I just thank you again for your work on SB 372. I'm very happy to hear that you are conducting all this outreach to the fleets, small fleets and large fleets, I'm assuming. I have two questions. One is, are you talking with them about the financial tools they want and need to see in addition to non-financial tools, or is it just the non-financial tools? That's one. And then the second thing is, I was thinking that since SB 372 requires that, I think it's 75% of funds be spent in underserved communities, it might be helpful too, as part of that outreach, to reach out to environmental justice groups, and just wondering what your status is on that.
Yeah, thank you for your comments, Lauren. So in terms of your first question, I actually am like focusing on the second question now. But in terms of your first question, we are going to be surveying folks and asking through a variety of different listening sessions and different types of outreach avenues, what financial supports and non-financial supports would be most beneficial to our stakeholder groups, including small fleets. And then we are, our team individually and CARB as a larger team is making various efforts on how to connect with various EJ communities. And so we will be coordinating throughout CARB to make sure that we're reaching out to the correct stakeholders on that. But thank you for both of those comments.
Thank you. That sounds great, Danielle. I think I provided a list of some of those folks. Obviously, not an exhaustive list earlier. I had an additional question or point, because I hear people talking about this. SB 372 does envision a role for larger fleets as well, in addition to smaller fleets. And I don't want to oversimplify it, but the idea that larger fleets, can leverage private financing, bringing more private finance into the market by having, tools provided to them that help them to do that. And small fleets may be more direct recipients of state funds, was sort of how we thought about it and parsed it out in 372. So if that is helpful to you as you think about and who you talk to, there may be sort of a way to go forward and do both.
Yeah, definitely. I think that it is a helpful clarification for sure. And focusing on both categories is definitely our path forward. So yeah, I appreciate that clarification though.
I know you guys are on it. I just wanted to mention.
Yeah, I appreciate that comment. So
thank you.
Next up, we have Lisa Atkinson. Lisa, I've unmuted your mic.
That was my hand raised from previous time.
Okay, thank you. Next up, we have Matt Shrop. Matt, I have unmuted your mic.
Hi, guys. Matt Shrop from Harbor Trucking Association. Thank you, Danielle, for that. I know you guys, I'm assuming, I believe that you guys did a roundtable meeting with existing CalCap lenders and seeing how we're sort of setting the tone here and how SB 372 is going to fit into the 3-year funding plan and where this money is coming from. I was wondering if it is an appropriate time to speak to that roundtable and what potential feedback you heard from those lenders, or if there's another time that we as stakeholders can listen in on what exactly was discussed and what potential pathways from a lender perspective are under consideration.
Yeah, I can share a little bit, and then if more discussion is needed, then we can get some additional time on the calendar. But in general, I can say that in terms of feedback that we received from the lenders on it was on May 11th was the date that we held the roundtable. We did hear a lot of similar feedback as we heard in our ZE pilot work group and truck loan assistance work group. And some of that feedback was, I guess some of the stuff that sounds like kind of stands out in my mind was that folks were also concerned about reducing the amount of the AQUIP allocation that was going towards the pilot versus the traditional truck loan assistance program. And addition to that, you know, folks were open to the concept of doing a pilot for zero emission trucks, but there was some hesitation from some groups of people in terms of providing loans for those trucks or for the zero emission trucks. And then on the other side, there was also people that were very supportive of that and that new area for lending. So yeah, I don't know if there's anyone else that wanted to add any additional comments from the work group. Or if that's something we should talk about more at a later date. I guess I shouldn't say work group, from the lender roundtable.
Sorry, Matt, I thought you were done. If you want to raise your hand again, I'll unmute you. There we go. Sorry.
Happens all the time. I was just going to say, don't all talk at once, everyone. And it just sounds like, Danielle, obviously you guys are doing a great job in that outreach. So however we can help to try to facilitate more of those discussions, we're happy to. I think that there's consensus about moving funds away from one very successful program that still has legacy regulatory requirements that it supports being, I guess, unfunded or defunded for purposes of supporting SB 372. I feel like we should be able to have both, especially in the initial years. So appreciate your outreach and thank you for the second unmute. That rarely happens to me, and talk soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
We have, oh, I'm sorry, I spoke too soon. Nico, I have unmuted your mic.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, Nico, welcome with the California Fuel Cell Partnership. I had a question with regards to SB 372 and the topic of risk reduction instruments, and this is more of a general question. I hear the topic on having financial institutions and lenders involved. What's your engagement with the insurance industry? I'm increasingly learning that the insurance industry is struggling to insure equipment that's expected to be rolled out because they don't have operational data. And when I say operational data, I mean large amounts of operational data. And if there is a way to engage them in this process, that may be valuable towards reaching the targets that you're aiming for.
Yeah, thank you for that, Nico. I think this is definitely something that we are looking into further and seeing if there's any thing additional that we can provide in this area. You know, there have been some comments about potentially raising the interest rates, and that's something that we want to keep a cap on. So we are exploring other risk reduction instruments and having further discussions with our lenders as well.
Thank you.
We have no more raised hands and no questions in the Q&A box that relate to this topic.
Okay, thank you, Arya. And now, next up on our agenda, we have an update from Ben Wender at the California Energy Commission. And I think you got a little preview of that earlier, but providing some more details, I will turn it over now to Ben.
Yeah, thanks so much, Jason, and excited to be here and share a recent R&D project. My name is Ben Wender. I work in the CEC's Research and Development Division on the transportation team. The R&D division funds technology advancement projects that support, efficient, grid-friendly electrification and help reach state policy goals. The project I want to share today is a recent pretty large award for our program for the Electric Truck Research and Utilization Center. Sorry, too many acronyms in my brain there. That we kicked off just in the end of 2021 and winter of 2021. It's led by the Electric Power Research Institute, EPRI, with CalSTART and a whole host of other project partners that will hope create some new knowledge and advanced technologies that will help increase access to public heavy-duty charging along heavily trafficked freight corridors. So it's a really broad project. There's a number of elements to the scope of work that I want to highlight today, and maybe we'll pause for a second on the high power charging research and development since that came up. And of course, look forward to questions, input, and feel free to reach out to me anytime just to learn more or get connected with the project team. The first kind of core foundational task for the project is based and designed to really create strong stakeholder engagement. The team was pretty intentional in creating a number of advisory committees and using the expertise of those committees to inform the project both early on in its formation and continually throughout the project. So there's a community advisory committee that's going to focus on hearing from the communities within these heavily trafficked freight regions, understanding their priorities and values in the deployment of high power charging infrastructure. There's an industry advisory committee that's going to inform the project as to both changes in technology on the automotive vehicle side, as well as from charging hardware and service providers. And there's a workforce development advisory committee, which I've seen come up in a couple of the comments, to think about what type of workforce requirements there are to expand this charging infrastructure and what the implications are for educational institutions locally here in California, how we can best support that development of workforce. So that's really the first chunk of work, is these advisory committees, getting them set up and using that to inform the later tasks. The second big chunk of work is around kind of understanding, building consensus and awareness of fleet needs and the technology maturity, again, both on the vehicle and the charger side, to make this high power charging and rapid turnaround of long route routes possible. And so we'll be doing a number of surveys and engagements to kind of get better understanding of where things are today, where they may be going in the near future, and then use that to inform some of our modeling and planning strategies. Again, looking at these questions of, how much freight traffic is there now? How much fueling activity happens there now? How might we start deploying these networks of publicly accessible high power chargers through these heavily trafficked corridors? What power level? When do they need to start getting out there? What type of utilization do we expect? And so there's a set of modeling activities that will then be visualized and presented accessibly to other stakeholders to get a sense. The third chunk of project activities, and this came up earlier in the call, is conducting laboratory and limited pilot demonstrations of this high power charging technologies. And that's going to take a few different forms. Of course, there will be, the project is funding the development of some large testing resources and capabilities located in Southern California that'll be hosted both through SCE, University of California at Riverside, and network connected to NREL. And so they'll be doing coordinated testing and, real-time simulation, hardware in the loop simulation of these high power charging technologies. But it's also going to provide resources to innovative companies commercializing high power charging technology. And so we want to provide a place where external ideas can come in, be tested, be evaluated for safety, and make sure we support the safe development of these technologies by third-party vendors. And so there's a host of technology, applied testing happening down in the research lab. And then the last part of the project that I'll highlight is pilot deployments of some of this high power charging technology located in initially the Southern California region. So there'll be a pilot site outside of the ports area, and one a little more inland around Ontario. And these will start testing out and collecting operational data with these higher power charging technologies, integrating them with distributed energy resources and, charging management, site energy control strategies, and starting to get an understanding of how to operate these systems in ways that both enable these more challenging operational requirements, but also limit impacts to the electricity system. So that's a pretty high level description of some of the buckets of activities. As I briefly mentioned, they're getting started with a number of these advisory committees in the near term. So I hope some of the folks on the call today have been contacted, and if you would be interested in participating and becoming involved in this project, please don't hesitate to reach out to me, or CARB colleagues can help get in touch with me anytime. That's a big enough ramble. I'll pause there and see if anybody has any questions.
Hey, Ben, we do have a raised hand from Jason Caranto. Jason, I have unmuted your mic.
Just a quick question, Ben, and thank you for the update. Is CEC focused on any non-battery research and development currently that you might talk to us about?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm probably not the best person, although I work closely with a number of folks who have done some great work in hydrogen technologies recently. The R&D division has a few awards looking both at, again, kind of on-road, very challenging, long haul, long distance duty cycles that are very difficult to complete with battery electric. So there have been some recent awards in that area, as well as, off-road, switcher locomotives, marine. And so we are active in that area as well. And if you want to shoot me an email, I'm happy to connect you with the right folks there.
Great, thank you.
There are no more raised hands or questions in the Q&A box about this topic.
All right, thank you, Arya. Thank you so much, Ben. Really appreciate your update and being here with us today. And again, if anyone has additional feedback for Ben, I can arrange to get you in touch and connect you there. So we're now at the point where we have time for questions and comments on any of the items we've discussed today. As I mentioned earlier, If we don't get a chance to hear your question or comment today, please be sure to send them anything to my email address, which is shown both on the agenda and will also be shown on the final slide of this presentation. And with that, I will ask Arya again if there are any questions or comments.
We do have a comment in the Q&A box that I'd like to read out loud for the recording from Jerry Rohn. Southern California is going to run out of fresh water soon. HEFF can bring 103 million gallons per day from the Mississippi River to Los Angeles at a cost of $10 per 1,000 gallons. All this is all solar PV powered. Is water delivery to LA considered a HD long haul truck? Parcel delivery back to the east would be available inside the empty tankers. The key feature is a CD of 0.07 and frontal area of 8.77 square feet to carry a 5,000-pound payload. The guideway cost is $200,000 per mile. This removes all air pollution from solving the drinking water issue.
All right. Thank you for sharing that with us, Jerry. That sounds very interesting, and we can get together and talk offline if you have more information about that you want to share with us.
There are, oh, I'm sorry, I'm in the wrong window. There are no raised hands.
Okay. Okay, then I can go over some of the next steps in the process here. I'll just remind folks that the final funding plan workshop again is scheduled for July 21st. That will be an opportunity to provide feedback and ask questions on the heavy duty investment strategy, as well as all the other projects that are part of our overall funding plan for clean transportation incentives. We do anticipate that the draft funding plan and the heavy duty investment strategy will be released in the early October timeframe. And that will open a public comment period from October 7th to November 7th. And then the board will be meeting to listen to public testimony and approve the funding plan at their meeting on November 17th and 18th in this fall. And I'll just note that if you have any comments or questions specific to today's work group meeting, anything you want to make sure that we know before we pull together our draft funding plan, I would just ask that you provide any comments or feedback within the next 2 weeks or by June 8th. And that will make sure that we can incorporate that going forward. So we will continue to keep you updated with our meeting schedule, both on the AQIP webpage and by email updates through Gov Delivery. And before we close, I would just ask if any of our other panelists today have anything else that they'd like to add before we conclude today's meeting. Anything from the other panelists? Okay, and if not, then I just want to thank all of our panelists for taking the time to be here and present today, and also thank all of you, the attendees, for participating in today's work group meeting. And I hope you all enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you very much.